채널 젊은달. 오늘 소개해드리고 싶은 분은 호주 출신 촬영감독님 그렉 프레이저입니다. 촬영에 관심이 없는 분도 이분 이름은 한 번쯤 들어보셨을 것 같은데요. 최근에 듄, 더 배트맨, 더 크리에이터, 로그원 등 굵직한 상업영화도 많이 찍었지만 그의 필모를 자세히 살펴보시면 제인 캄피언의 브라이트 스타, 맷 리브즈의 렛미, 캐서린 비골로의 제로 다크 서티, 베넷 밀러의 폭스캐쳐 등 어마무시한 필모를 확인하실 수 있습니다.
Pretty amazing, so thank you.
그렇게 오늘 번역해드릴 영상은 시네픽스에서 진행한 인터뷰로 그렉 프레이저가 그의 필모에서 뽑은 최애숏들이란 영상입니다. 저도 개인적으로 즐겁게 본 인터뷰라 이렇게 번역을 진행해봤습니다. 그럼 즐겁고 유익한 감상 되시길 바랍니다. 영화로운 시간 시네마클럽의 6기 10월 수강신청을 받고 있습니다. 이번에도 커리큘럼 A와 B로 각각 4강으로 구성되어 있고요. 총 24시간의 강연이 준비되어 있습니다. 커리큘럼의 자세한 정보와 수강신청은 아래 홈페이지 링크를 참고해 주시기 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
Zero Dark 30, the first film that I had shot on digital. We tested film, we tested 16mm, we tested a whole series of different options for that movie. And that was the first time I'd used a digital camera for a film. So I tested quite a few things. Now, with a digital camera, just to get into the technicals, pretty much any digital camera shoots beautiful images if you expose the image properly and if you shoot it properly. What I knew on Zero Dark 30 was that we were going to be facing challenges that we were never going to have the opportunities to shoot things properly all the time. We were going to need a camera that was going to be able to kind of be in situations that weren't bulletproof. And my favorite shot in that film is actually one of the hardest technically to achieve. And it's the one that I tested my cameras on. And that's the scene where Jessica Chastain's character is coming into the first interrogation. You've got Retta, our actor, on the floor, strung up with ropes. And we're over Retta and the door opens. So it goes from almost pitch blackness to blown out highlight behind Jessica as she comes through that door. I mean, the shot in itself, I think, sums up a lot of things about the film as well, talking about kind of the horrors. But obviously I couldn't test that shot when I was testing in Hollywood because that was in Jordan. But I knew we were going to shoot that. And I knew because we'd scouted it. So I did these tests where I would be shooting the darkest interior in a test bay and the brightest Los Angeles sun outside. And I would see which cameras perform the best. And, the Arri Alexa just head and shoulders above any other comparable camera at that time. So it was because during those times that I broke the camera effectively that it performed well. But that wasn't why I love the shot. I love the shot for other reasons, but I think it's interesting that became my technical sort of flag in the sand. Star Wars Rogue One. My most favorite shot in that film is the Darth Vader lightsaber coming on at the end of Rogue One. To me, I don't know, I still kind of get the chills when I watch that. And, the magic's kind of lost a little bit. With me being on set, it's me who remembers how much effort we went to figure out a way to make him backlit, even though the lightsaber's front lighting him, to make the lightsaber not light too much of Darth Vader, because Darth Vader front lit doesn't look as good as Darth Vader backlit. Like, there's a whole series of tests that we did to really figure out how to make that scene work, how to make that introduction work. It's funny, the first time Gareth talked to me about that scene, because that scene occurred as a pickup scene. The film was going to end a slightly different way, not fundamentally, but just the kind of the way they got to the end. We'd shot a really great scene. And, for all I was aware, that was in the film. Gareth called me and said, we've got an idea. Vader's in the ship. He's going to go gangbusters. And I went, okay, cool. I mean, always, anytime Vader's on set, it's always a good day, right? So you kind of, but I was a bit perplexed because we'd shot something really good. And I sort of expressed that to Gareth and said, okay, well, sure, of course. I don't quite understand why, but, fair enough. He explained the scene and I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool scene. But the main thing was, it was a chance to really create an iconic Vader moment. As iconic as Vader walking through the smoke in the door of A New Hope. That scene, this black figure in this white space. I mean, you can't get any more iconic than that. It was our chance to kind of try and create something that was iconic also. I wouldn't say as iconic because nothing would be. That's really, we hold that up as our gold standard. But, it was our chance to kind of create a Vader scene that had that level of sort of iconicness that people hopefully will watch years down the track and go, I want our thing to look like that. You know, Lion, I shot the same year that I shot Rogue One. So for me, those two movies are kind of completely linked. And they're all, I wouldn't say they're almost the same movie, but for me, they had some very similar attributes that I sort of felt like I was able to kind of draw upon one to give to the other and vice versa. You know, one of the things in Lion that we were toying with and playing with was scale, was Saru's scale when it comes to big things. And if you watch any Star Wars film, that's what it's all about. It's, you know, knowing how big a human is going into this massive Millennium Falcon. You know how big the Millennium Falcon is going to this massive Death Star. Like, you know, it's scale upon scale upon scale. You know, and doing something like Lion, you know, Saru, we play Saru's story very much at his level. Like, we treat Saru as a full-sized character. We don't look down at him. We don't look up at him to make, like, we just sit at his level. And that was a conscious, deliberate choice that Garth and I made to make sure that every time we saw Saru, for the most part, we were at his eye level. And it helps create a bond with the audience. Like, the audience doesn't necessarily see this character as a child all the time, but when we want them to, then it helps, because then we can see him as a child, him surrounded by tall adults at a train station. You know, we can see his helplessness. But one of my most favorite scenes in that entire movie is where Saru is running across the Howrah Bridge, and he hears some dogs and stops in the middle of the Howrah Bridge. What I love about that character's journey at that point in time is the bridge is obviously symbolic, right? It's crossing over. It's him moving from one to another. But I think what's really important for the audience to realize at that point in time is just how vulnerable this guy is. This young kid is kind of tiny amongst this massive, empty, desolate bridge, and it's empty, which, you know, anybody that's been to India realizes that rarely, if ever, happens. It says so much about the film and says so much about the character at that point in time. So, 듄 Part 1, favorite shot. You know, there's a few, but I'm gonna specify the shot that sums up that entire film for me, and that's when Paul first receives Face Full of Spice. I love the way Timothy looks in that, and I love Timothy's performance in that, and I love the way that Joe and Denis have cut that in a way that it kind of it ages Paul. He seems to grow a few years, like he seems to age a few years at that exact moment. And, you know, I don't know if it's a combination of sort of being a little more weathered because of the sand on his face, but he feels like he's just kind of matured.
Denis' pick was from that same sequence. Is sort of
the feat.
Man on the moon kind of first steps.
I remember that scene because when we shot that, you know, we were trying really hard to keep that camera nice and steady because there was lots of wind and stuff. You know, it was a really hard one because obviously when you do footsteps, you can't go again easily because there are footsteps in the way. So you've got to clean the sand, you've got to really prepare it. And it was one of those scenes that, you know, we didn't get many shots at, you know, so everything had to work, the wind, the focus, the footsteps, you know, the movement. So fun sequence to shoot. The Batman is a film I shot over the course of 3 years, you know, with COVID. So, you know, for me, who normally does a film sort of 6-7 months and then moves on, you know, I can kind of compartmentalize a film and kind of move on from it and change the style or change the look so that the next film's very different. You know, the Batman I was living with for 3 years. The Batman was in my brain, in my, you know, visual cortex for 3 years. There's a couple I love in that film. The first introduction of our main character putting on his eye makeup. But I think my most favorite is the end of the movie. The Riddler has effectively realized that he has not succeeded in his journey. He's standing in prison. You know, he's staring out the window, wondering what's going on. And then a little voice comes in and has a chat to him.
Hey. Don't be sad. You did so well.
I love the mood of that scene, and I love the fact that it sets up such an interesting arc for those characters. And it ends in a really sort of abstract way where we don't get to see those characters too clearly. It ends up being light, flare, darkness. It feels to me like a little bit like being underwater, except being in prison. It was a low sun, and because of that, it allowed us the flexibility to be able to kind of create light and flair. We'd been in the prison a few times before. We'd been in, interrogation cell, and this needed to be a lot more unusual. So the concept effectively was to try and create something that was a little more, heavenly, something that was a little bit harder to kind of put a pin in and harder to read. 듄 Part 2 was a tough one because I lived and breathed like all of our collaborators on that movie, every single shot, every single day. But I think the one that really got my blood going in the cinema was during Paul's worm writing. I saw Denis' favorite shot on this, and it was really funny. I was like watching his interview like a fanboy. And it's funny because Denis' favorite shot is where Paul stands up. It's the shot behind him as he kind of gets his knee off the worm and then starts to stand up. My favorite shot was the one exactly after that, where he's standing up and it's on a long lens. It's shaking and moving really quickly. I remember seeing that in the cinema for the first time. I saw the film with Denis, with full sound and everything. And I was high-fiving the air. Like I was, punching Denis, going, this is amazing. With Hans' score and with everything, that was my favorite shot for that whole sequence. And, it's still, every time I see it, even from when we shot it, I remember seeing it, on the monitor being shot, and I had the same reaction. So it hasn't lost any of its impact on me. That sequence was one of those labors of love that we, as an entire film, spent our days working really hard on, because that was probably the longest sequence in the entire film. We started that before we started filming, and I think probably the last shot in the sequence we did maybe a week before we wrapped. It took that long. And you know why? Because it's complicated. Like we had nothing to draw on as reference. Like we had no other worm writing sequences that we could draw upon to figure out how to film this. And getting it right, we were meticulous with. Like it was, if the stunt didn't quite work, or if the camera shake wasn't quite right, because everything when you make a movie is false. We are making things up. Like to move the camera like that, we have to shake it in a way that's not natural. We didn't have a machine in the desert traveling at 150 miles an hour with a worm. We had to make it up. So it's a really fine balance between it looking false and feeling real. And it was one of those things that we knew we were going to have to work hard on, and we did. And yeah, I'm really proud of that shot. I just love it. I just love that shot. Every time it comes up, I'm like a kid again. I'm a massive fan of the film Magnolia, Paul Thomas Anderson. Like there's a few films that I could sit here and kind of go on, talk about changing my life, opening my eyes to cinema, because I was a photographer. If you know anything about me, I used to be a photographer, and I used to know all the photographers, but I didn't really understand film. I never studied it. I never trained myself to know what made cinema. And as I was learning cinema, as I realized I wanted to transition to become a cinematographer, there was a number of films that became my go-to films that I could probably recount every single shot in those movies. I just watched Magnolia again recently, probably for the 75th time or something. And my new favorite shot in that film, every other shot's my favorite shot, by the way, but my new favorite shot as of today is the final shot in Magnolia. The track in, as John C. Reilly comes to sit down and talk to her, and it pushes in. It's a 2 or 3 minute shot. It's a fantastic 2 or 3 minute shot. The culmination of the entire movie is summed up in that entire shot with that character. And the cinematography and the lighting is incredible. I watched it again, and just direction wise, it's insane. Acting wise, it's insane. Lighting wise, it's insane. I mean, Robert Elswit, the master. Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how much I've been inspired by that film.